Welcome to the Persuasive Mindset, your podcast guide to mastering the art of persuasion by exploring its role across diverse fields through a series of expert interviews. I am your host, Dr. Sorina Matthey. You are about to start listening to the second part of our conversation with Professor Patsy Rodenburg, who is a world-renowned voice teacher and coach based in the United Kingdom. As mentioned in the first episode, Professor Rodenburg has over 4 decades of expertise, and her work has helped transform countless lives through her mastery in restoring authentic voice and presence. In this episode, you'll learn details regarding Professor Rodenburg's overall work. Themes that will be covered include power, control, leadership, breath, voice, and much more. And as you prepare to become more persuasive for your upcoming virtual work-related meeting, make sure to take into account and practice ahead using Professor Rodenburg's advice.
Often people just slap on a radio mic and you just get loud mumbling. You don't hear the words. They think that technology is an aid. It's not the thing itself. The thing itself is you with your presence, with your body, without the wrong tensions in your body, particularly around the jaw, the neck, the shoulders, the spine, not being pulled down, which is first circle, or pulled up and you get braced. You've got to get your stomach released a bit because the breath has to go down there. You've got to get your knees unlocked. You've got to get the energy forward on the front of your feet. And you could do that quite quickly by, if you walk with energy down a corridor, your body starts to come into its alignment.
And now, let's dive into the second part of our conversation with Professor Rodenburg. Enjoy! One of the many fascinating aspects that I learned about your work while preparing for this interview was that throughout your career, you have chosen to teach a diverse group of students. And myself, as well as the listeners, would like to know, how do you adapt your work and your teaching tools in a way in which these are accepted by students from such varied backgrounds, which range from a school to a boardroom and even to prisons?
Well, I think you've just got to show up and be yourself. I mean, I didn't know that I could teach 4-year-olds when I was teaching 4-year-olds, but I just didn't put on a silly voice. I just spoke to them. I didn't be nice. I just speak to them. I'm afraid to me, it's not rocket science. You fundamentally have to care. I have many faults, but one is not a mean-spirited thing. I love people to do well. I have no envy issues. If you're going into a room to help somebody, you have to honor them. You have to want them to do well. And of course, you have to look around and see what they're dealing with. And I don't know how I figured it out, but I figured it out. And I remember going into prisons because I needed to make money, and it wasn't a choice that I could turn down. And I got in there purely it was luck. And I was terrified. And of course, you're always terrified when you go into any place. But they don't want to see your terror because that's not useful. What they want to know is that you want to help them. I've been saying again and again in the last few months, just think about the student. We think about the leader, and if you're teaching, you are the leader. The leader has to keep the space safe. You can't lead. I said to a top male leader, he's second in charge of one of the biggest companies in the world. I said, do you realize that there is about 2 men in this team of yours that want you to fail? And he couldn't believe it. And I said, you just have to not get out of your ego and look around the space and feel the space. Just like an actor can feel members of the audience not liking their work, but they still got to carry on with the work. You're not going to be liked. I have no issue about being liked. I have to try and be fair, and sometimes people think I'm not fair because I'm stopping them doing something they want to do, but I'm looking after the group. You look after the group. So that person might be sulking in the corner because you've said to them, don't keep on interrupting her. So it's not, it's just doing what is fair and wanting people to succeed. And you can only, as my grandmother used to say, and I talk about it in the book, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. So whenever you go into any space, you get very good, like an actor after going on stage for a few years can go out and feel the audience. They can feel every the 1,000 people in the audience, they can feel it all. It's not a magical thing. It's a repetition. It's the fundamental of craft. You have to keep on doing it. You have to keep on doing it. And you just take, why are these people here? Well, prisoners are often there because it's better than being in their cell. But you just have to have goodwill to them and believe that what you're teaching might be of use, even though they might hate it.
I'm curious to know, how do you see the link between theater and therapy? Meaning, do you think your work has a therapeutic side to it? And how would you describe your approach to leadership and group dynamics while teaching?
I think theatre is therapeutic, but it's not therapy. I'm not trained. My work is incredibly practical. It's about embodiment. But if you get present and you get somebody breathing, they're going to experience things. They might experience what stopped their breathing in the first place, which is some form of trauma. I don't think of myself like that. I very carefully assess, almost on a daily basis, what my contract is with people. And I don't go, I mean, of course you have to observe. That's what being in second circle presence is, that you're looking outside yourself, you're curious, you notice things. It's just about survival. It's just about going into a space where, I'm 22 and I'm teaching people into their 40s and 50s, and you think, oh my God, this is going to be. So all you can do is teach what you know. Teach what you know and observe and wish them all well, even though some wishing well means that you have to say to someone, I don't think that's a funny joke and you've just hurt someone. So they might not like me, but the major thing in leadership is to look after the group. And then something wonderful happens. We call it ensemble in theatre, but it's a community happens. And instead of the thing that what is so patriarchal in terms of leadership is what is called command and control. I stand here, I give out in third circle, I give out and I control you. Now, that's not how people want to be led. And it's a weak form of leadership because you don't get everyone's opinion. So if you can, sometimes you have to start a group by saying, no, you're not going to, not in a rigid command and control, but you have to say, no, you're not going to behave like that. You're not going to roll your eyes when people speak. I mean, I'll stop that straight away. It doesn't matter who it is. It can be the most famous actor in the world. I have no issue about that. If the group is what you're looking after, people talk about the safe space all the time, and you say, but you have to do the safe. You can't talk about it. You can't say, we have to keep a safe space, whether you have a completely safe space. But it only happens if somebody takes responsibility to hold the space and to say to anyone destroying the space, that is inappropriate. I don't say it in an angry voice. I don't shout at them. I tell you what a lot of women do, and I talk about it in the book, is that something annoys them and they don't say anything, and it goes on and it festers, and suddenly they say, don't do that. And everyone's saying, oh, that's a hysterical woman. It's not a hysterical woman. It's a woman who's felt something very deeply but hasn't dared say until it's really burnt in them. It's sort of set fire in them. so the best thing, and again, a lot of my work is very embodied craft, practice. If you know that you have a difficult conversation, you have to practice it out aloud. And you might also, you're going into that board meeting and there's somebody who's always going to interrupt. And if you look at it in a big way, they interrupt a lot of people, but they're going to start interrupting you because you're the woman and, they have more power than you. And you might have to practice saying, please don't interrupt me.
And then linked to this idea of power, can you please talk a little bit more about the concept of power and the concept of leadership when it comes to group dynamics?
Power, if we want power and leadership, well, I say to people, you find the way you want to say it, but I will say to someone, can you please not interrupt me? But it has to happen the first time it happens. And the great advantage of that as a leader is that everyone knows that you know who the troublemaker is. I can't tell you, I go into a group of students and I meet them and immediately I turn to someone and say, stop rolling your eyes when that person works. And the group goes, oh my God, she knows. A group is a very intelligent thing. That's why we need groups, because all those intelligences, we need very diverse groups, we need all that, because all those people have a different view, and that's going to make us much more intelligent and much more able to cope. But suddenly I'm saying to someone within 15 seconds in the room, and they won't like it, why are you smiling and in that rather smug way when that woman speaks or that people are speaking? And the group just goes, oh God, somebody knows. So if I go back to this man who was controlling this major company, he couldn't believe that two people didn't want that. That's when you get your arrogance. You think, what? They're challenging me. And I said, can't you feel it? And he phoned about 2 days later. He said, you're right. They don't want me to. I said, well, let's be obvious. Let's just say the obvious things. I say very obvious things to women, and it gets them very upset sometimes. Generally, I have no reference, intellectually, I have no research on this, but I have a reference. The reference is that I know if you get 24 people in the room, some of them don't want it to work. Get over it. If women want power, we have to really, really look at the truth, because people who haven't got power have to be cleverer. My mother and my grandmother were cleverer than my father, but they didn't have any road to power. But they were cleverer. They knew what was going on. And in a way, if a woman gets that, she gets the respect of everybody. Without games, women have been taught to play games. A student of mine said to me, and she's teaching in the corporate world, she said, all the men flirt with me. And I said, and what do you do? And she thought about it. And she said, well, I suppose I flirt back. I said, no. She said, but I like flirting. I said, so what? Do you expect them to take you seriously if you flirt? I had to say quite often, it's quite a relief getting older, You'd have to say, I don't dress in a sexual way. It doesn't mean to say you can't, but you also then have to take the issue around that. I just, in my world, I get up, I work, I don't sit and I'm up, I'm on my feet, I have to get on the floor, lying on the floor, I've got to get down, I've got to get up. So it's useless. But you have to say, if you can stop the flirt if you want to. But a lot of course, I don't blame anyone. Actually, a good flirt is lovely, but I don't think it's useful in a group or because it looks like favoritism. I'm flirting with you, and you just have to go, okay. And maybe I had a wonderful woman who's taken over a massive company. She's an engineer, and it was a massive battle to take over this company. And she's brilliant, and she's doing great. But she said, I don't that the board is, the team does events, and it's always involving drink and going out and getting drunk. And she said, I don't feel that I want to do that. And I said, well, I don't think every man and every woman in that team wants to do it either. She said, oh, that's true. There's only the guy that was leading the team and a couple of his friends like to do that. And I said, you're in charge. What do you want to do? And she said, really? And I said, yes, you can. You don't have to go out and have a team bonding thing over booze and whatever. And she said, well, I like to cook. And of course, these are companies with huge amounts of money. They can throw money at things. And I said, so what would you like? She said, I'd like to go away and have a 3-day cooking masterclass. And she said, only 2 of the men didn't want to do it. The rest, and that's what I'm saying. I think men have to be empowered to help us because they're not used to that. There are amazing men. But what I find is that when a woman in leadership is very authentic and doesn't play any games and just stops it, they will side with you. The vast majority of people are fundamentally decent, actually. And she said all these guys were saying, oh, God, can we do that again? Can we bring our wives along? And she said, of course you can. But it was just her taking her power that she could break something that had been stuck in the company full of engineers on a very high level. And most of the men, only 2 were unhappy because, if I, on Wall Street, it's happened a few times, you've protected a woman from somebody in a session and suddenly the other men stand up. And I say to the men, stand up sooner.
I'd like to ask you another question linked to the concept of power, and that is, what are some of your overall views on how can women try to regain their power, either in the private or the public spheres, when they actually realize that they're being controlled or manipulated by their male partners or colleagues?
Well, this happens a great deal in my work in top organizations that are mostly male. I mean, if you go back to my lawyer, the only woman, not anymore because she's promoted them, promote women. I mean, some of the top banking organizations, in a room of, a team, there's only one woman. And that gets very, very hard. And you have to make a decision about, do I play along with the guys or do I stand on my own? And that's hard. But I don't think playing along works out in the end. Doesn't mean to say you have to be negative, or I think you just have to hold your own space and you have to encourage women into the space. And unfortunately, some women don't want other women around. Some women want to be the only woman, and that's I don't like it. It was Madeleine Albright that said any woman that didn't support another woman, there's a special place in hell for them. I'm paraphrasing it. But we should be promoting women. But not, you don't have to look for people saying, oh, I don't want to be, selected because I'm a woman. But these women that are in certain organizations are so knowledgeable. You can be a white man from Eton and just speak well and know nothing. The women that have got there, they're incredibly critical to the organization. They know a lot. They've worked harder than anyone. So organizations have to actively help each other and also help men to protect women as well. It's not patronizing. It's not a patronizing thing. If you're on a subway late at night and somebody starts playing up the relief when another man steps in. We're not We don't need to do it all up. We need each other. We need each other. I think when it becomes a personal thing, I think the idea of gaslighting is a new idea, but we've known it happened. People, to control somebody, you normally have to isolate them. And I suppose you have to tell people. You have to start talking to people. I suppose it's the secret that kills us. Oedipus finds that out. It's the secret. The secret that I'm not allowed my own bank account. The secret that that's been taken. Because only by telling your stories, and that is a story. My boyfriend doesn't want me to meet my friends, and he looks at my bank account. That's, again, when I say to control a room, you have to speak sooner rather than later. All you can say to people is, if it feels wrong and it's there's control, back to that idea of command and control. And that's how men have been keeping control over women for thousands of years. Thousands. It's not a habit that can be broken quickly. It's only 50 years or so since the equality laws for women. I mean, that's only a very short time, really. So proactively talk to people. Talk to people. At least now the police understand these things. I mean, that has to be at least a great thing that has happened, that there are organizations, maybe you don't get to them soon enough, but it's the secret. I talk about when we take a proper breath, and again, all my work is in the presence, the body, the breath, the voice, that it starts there. It doesn't end. It starts. You have to plow a field. If you sometimes just take a bit of a moment, something has upset you, let your shoulders release. Take a breath and breathe, because when we take a breath, we understand what we feel and we understand what we think. It sounds very simple. And go for a walk. Say, is this controlling me? Who can I talk to? And at least, I always think that the command and control of people, and women can do it as well, so let's not say that it doesn't happen that way, is that you don't feel that you have any power. The person you're trying to control has more power than you, is often more attractive than you, or more intelligent than you, or whatever, and you want to keep them. So you just have to, it sounds so simple, but sometimes just thinking, this feels wrong. This feels wrong. I don't see why I shouldn't have my own bank account. When I first married, you couldn't have your own bank account. It's only a few years ago, you had to have your husband's approval to have a bank account on your own. It's just, ridiculous. But there it is. So it's only a few, 100 years or so ago that we got property rights. That if I marry you, you don't immediately have my property. So these are things that are still haunting us, talking about hauntings. So you have to just check in and talk to someone. And there's a sonnet of Shakespeare's, Sonnet 35, when he talks about loving somebody so much that I, an accessory, needs must be to that sweet thief which sourly robs from me. This is a dynamic that we find ourselves supporting someone who is, we find ourselves in an imaginary courtroom, and you've been mugged and you start to defend your mugger, and that has to be broken. And I have no skill to help with that, because I'm not a therapist, but I do know that it's about trying to speak out sooner rather than later. I mean, not only in controlling a group, but in your own relationships. This is not right. I mean, very small example, when I was very young, and I just passed my driving test, and I think I'm a very good driver. I mean, people say that, but I remember this boyfriend. I had the gear shift, and as I was driving, his leg would come over, so I had to push his leg away to change gear. And I just stopped the car and I said, "Do you do that to your male friends when they drive?" And he looked at me and I said, "Why are you putting your leg to push up? You wouldn't do that to your. I've watched you be driven by your friends. Why are you putting your leg over to stop me changing gear?" Because it was one of those long gear, shafts, and you had to. And he looked at me and I said, and I drove and he did it. I said, "Stop it. Stop it. That is you trying to control me driving." So we look for these little things often. We have to look for these little signs in life. There's that they start very small, you see. So a group that is seemingly well behaved, as a teacher, you have to look at the little signs. You say, "Oh, that's not quite right. What's going on over there?" I can't overlook that. I have to deal with that over there. I have to deal with the fact that that guy over there is always playing on his phone when certain people speak. But they're not playing on their phone when people that they perceive are better than them are speaking. Why do you look at your phone when so and so and so and so speaks? Those things you can do. Maybe sometimes you do it privately with them. Why do you look at your phone when so and so is speaking? And not when, "Oh, do I?" Yes, try. Don't look at your phone. I say to women leaders, you have a right to look at a group that you're working with and say, "Put away your phones." Simple things. It starts. One of my mantras is, we do simple things before we can do the profound. We have to gain our power.
And I'm curious, what type of other examples of simple things are you referring to?
They're physical. They're active. They're not talked about. They're physical. I had a very, very lovely women from a top bank who I'm working with, and it was so wonderful. We had such a laugh. I mean, we were laughing up this session because they all came in, and there was a guy. I was just teaching the women, a guy that their peer, very high level, very, and they couldn't bear him because he always got too close. He just came in too close, and they looked about at me, and I said, "Step back," and they said, "What?" I said, "Step back." Does he go away? And does he come in too close to the men? No, because I've worked with a lot of top martial artists. In our DNA is that people shouldn't come in. If you respect somebody, you don't come in to their circle of energy, which is generally that they can't hit you. So that's built into us. If you see a dog that's dangerous, you move back and take the scale of it in on the scope. And they said, "We can't do that." So they came back and I said, "Okay, we're going to practice." 14 women. Every time I get close to you, step back. And they started to laugh. And I said, "You're just teaching us to step back." And I said, "Yeah."
Why do you think that women didn't just step back on their own intuitively?
Because years of being told that that's rude to a man, they're going to be upset. Pull away from him. He touches you, you can just step back. And it was very moving and very funny. And then they all texted me saying, "It works. It works." He just went, "Oh, you've stepped back."
I would like to now shift our conversation towards tips and tools. As you know, for our jobs, many of us are required to do both physical and virtual presentations. So I'd like to ask, in your experience, what are some tools and tips that people should learn about and implement in their own lives when it comes to physical presence versus virtual presence?
Well, it all comes from us. Technology helps in one way, but it doesn't help. On screen, you've still got to put what craft is refinding who you are in your presence. Where are you? Am I present? You have to then open up the body, which is now, when I think back 50 years ago when I was teaching young people, their bodies were much better shape in terms of alignment. The spines are now down and and all that stops the breath and stops the presence. So it's a very simple routine you have to get into. It depends what you're doing. And I would suggest if you can do it in a live situation, then you can use technology. Often people just slap on a radio mic and you just get loud mumbling. You don't hear the words. They think that technology is an aid. It's not the thing itself. The thing itself is you with your presence, with your body, without the wrong tensions in your body, particularly around the jaw, the neck, the shoulders, the spine, not being pulled down, which is first circle, or pulled up and you get braced. You've got to get your stomach released a bit because the breath has to go down there. You've got to get your knees unlocked. You've got to get the energy forward on the front of your feet. And you could do that quite quickly if you walk with energy down a corridor, your body starts to come into its alignment. You've got to remember to breathe. And you've got to remember to breathe when you're on Zoom. That's why people lost their voices in droves over COVID. I was getting calls from everyone. I've lost my voice because you're sitting there and you're not breathing and you're slumped and your throat is closed. You've got to sit up. You've got to do that. You've got to get the breath down, not up here. If you see tension in the upper chest, that's tight breath. It's going to make you more nervous. That's where fear goes. That's where stress. So try and release your shoulders and open the rib cage just to stretch the rib cage by just stretching over each side. Let the breath go down. Another quick trick is if you go and stand beside a wall and you just keep your shoulders released, put one foot in front of the other. Remember to keep the energy forward on the balls of the feet, and you breathe by pushing, the breath will go down. And if you breathe, you've got the breath for your voice. But we now know, I think, that if we don't take breath, we can't feel and we can't think. That's why people will say to me, I go to the board meeting and it's my turn to speak and it's going round the room and I forget everything. Well, I say, just take a breath. And it will come back because the brain will light up again and you come back. So you've got to get the body, the breath, the presence, and then just warm up your voice. It likes a bit of a warm up in the morning. Do you remember when you have a baby and you're lying in bed thinking, oh, they're going to sleep, and you can feel them begin to move around, and then they start humming, ma, 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 and then the big screen comes because they warmed up their voice. We need to use our voice. And this is critical for adults. The voice gets rusty and dusty if you don't use it. And you have to use it, even if you read out aloud. But it gets more interesting because it's the fundamentals of the embodiment work that I do that we get everything going so that we don't have to worry about it. I don't want anyone standing in front of an audience worrying about their voice, but that has to be worked. But what we also know, and this is critical for children, is that if you speak something out aloud fully, we remember it differently. We remember it deeply. So if children read out knowledge or speak it, they start to learn it differently. So this is fundamental. This is how we lived. Writing was invented originally just to keep administration. Anything worth knowing about the group or about the morals of the group or information about the group, you had to be learned out aloud. So we just have to start using our voice again. And if we do that, there's good news here. A bit of that work every day for 10 minutes, your voice is going to improve. It's not this mysterious thing that happens. And I think it's the body remembers how it should be. The body knows that it doesn't like not taking breath. That's why you pass out. The body thinks, oh, God, I better knock them out so I can breathe again. So it will come in and help you. Your body, your breath system, your mind, your heart will come and join you if you release these tensions and breathe.
Staying with the same topic of how to best use our voices, can you also share some tips for when we actually have a cold and need to deliver a presentation, but we notice that we're struggling to catch our breath?
If that happens, you have to be very sure you get the breath because we're so worried about our voice that we forget to breathe. So I would say to you, maybe if there's a desk in front of you, you put your hand and just push against the desk and feel that the breath is going down. You need to hydrate. You need to drink a lot of water. But sometimes the voice just goes and you can't use it because if you push through it, you could damage it. But there's generally colds and sore throats are you can work through as long as you breathe. Don't um, use aspirin and gargle with aspirin. A lot of people do that because it can hemorrhage the vocal folds. Just steam, just breathe, and you can get by on it. If the voice goes without pain, this is the joke. If it goes without pain, then it's probably more serious because it's on the vocal folds. So you've got to be just careful. It's a wonderful, resilient instrument. It needs looking after. It needs warming up. You should enjoy using it. It should be used more in schools. It should be you should practice aloud. I mean, I have these brilliant people come to me and say, I've got this enormous keynote and it's going to go to 90,000 people on, all over the world. And I say, have you practiced out aloud? And they look at it as though I'm mad. I said, it's not about reading. You've got to do it. There's huge numbers of muscles working when you speak. You can't stand up and think it's going to happen by magic. No, it's got to be worked out aloud with your presence and your breath and your voice. And you'll start to enjoy it.
Can everyone perfect their voices?
You've all got amazing instruments. You just have to dare to use it and enjoy it and hum around, use it. This is an amazing instrument. It never ceases to amaze me, the human voice. And I say that because I still struggle. Sometimes the ancient, yeah, sometimes the gift is the curse and the curse is the gift. If you struggle with your voice, you have to really work on it. I I never go into a room not prepared. People say, but one director once said to me, "You've probably done these exercises 3 times today," and I said, "Yes." He said, "It's like the first time," and I said, "Well, that's what actors do. You turn up as though it's the first and only time you've ever done these exercises. The first and only time people come and say, yes, I have to do this. I just have to train everyone, and I just come in and I just do it I know it backwards and forwards." And you say, well, that's the problem, really, isn't it? Because it's like you're just reciting something. You've got to own it and speak it from yourself, whatever it is. That's what an actor does every night.
When do you do your vocal exercises?
I do it in the morning, and it's a lovely thing to do. And then I take it into some text work. I will read out something out aloud. It's like a musician. It's like if you want to be good at something, you've got to work at it. It's not, and you have to tell, some of the students that I teach get very angry with me because I say, well, it's not, it's not haphazard. You see, if you teach craft and you do something, you get joy. There's joy, and it's the first time you manage to get I'm not a potter. I've tried a bit of pottery. I'm useless. But the first time you get the clay on the wheel correctly, you go, wow, I've just done it. So this is a constant work, but also constant satisfaction. I nailed that. So we have a wonderful saying in theatre. The amateur thinks it will go right. The professional knows it will go wrong. It will go wrong. You just You just have to work. And if it goes wrong, you just take a breath, go back, and, that's our humanity. Our humanity is, oh, I've just made a mistake. I remember the moment very early in my teaching, there was two major epiphanies, really. One was in a prison when I was teaching very tough customers. And I thought, oh, I seem to be able to control them. I mean, I'm not, that you do get spats and it gets a bit dangerous, but fundamentally, I felt I could talk to them and appeal to them and get them working without flattery, just normal. And the other moment was in teaching, and I thought, I don't know what I'm going to do next. But because I'd done enough work, I knew what to do next. It's an act of trust.
To me, the way you choose to prepare your voice in the morning sounds almost like a ritual. Is that an accurate depiction?
Well, I think ritual's a very good word. I think theatre's a ritual. I think meetings are rituals. It doesn't have to be pompous, but formality, form. If you're giving bad news to someone, you shouldn't be casual. I'm beginning to work for the National Health Service to try and improve the communication of doctors and nurses. You shouldn't go in and say, well, it's bad news, you're going to die. You've got to come in with your full presence. You've got to be clear. And that's not about accent, it's just clarity. You don't want them to worry about the word you've said. You have to give them respect, enough respect to be formal, not informal. Chit chat. I don't want chit chat in my room when I'm working. Yeah, you can do it outside. I don't care if you want to gossip outside. You come in because then we are saying something important is happening. This work is important. I was working with a big bank around 2008, and I've been teaching my presence and communication work, and somebody who was there were two people, a man and a woman, head of, I think it was South America actually, and they had to fire very high up people. People will, it's being fired is terrible, but they were firing people who'd been with the company for years and made a lot of money. And the woman said to me, I'm going to fire them in the way that what you would ask me to do, which is to be present, to be direct, to make eye contact, to be clear and honest. And the guy just went and did it, which was the house style, which is, well, you're going, forever. And she said years later, because she got back to me about 10 years after the event, and she said, those people I fired are still in contact with me. They still, because I showed up and showed them the respect of doing it formally. So I think ritual is part of form. It can shift, but I think, and ritual is the container. Theatre is the container, because it's contained and it's got incredible structures in it. You you can listen to unbearable truths, but you're contained enough to bear it. Just like a child knows that it could be a very frightening story, but the ritual of once upon a time, you tell a story, and they all lived happily ever after. That is a container, and that's ritual. And ritual prepares us for something important. So I'm a great believer in ritual. Doesn't have to be pompous.
Speaking of rituals and children, when you have a situation in which the child is raised happy and in a loving environment, I'm curious to know what type of rituals or exercises do you believe the parents and teachers should do with children in order to make sure that they help strengthen their voice and that children maintain their presence as they grow? Also, is there anything that you think can be incorporated in the school curricula to help children?
Yes. Read. Read out aloud to them and get them to read back to you, or speak out to you. Look, it sounds very, I don't know if it's odd, but you have to teach somewhere in a belief. Why I love Shakespeare is that I think he believes in our humanity. People saying, oh, he's old-fashioned. No, he's not. Yes, the language, but he talks about all the things there are certain things that we all, at some point in our life, will lie in bed at night worrying about. Power, somebody's bullying me, or I have to hurt that person. Love, is this love conditional or unconditional love? Justice, fairness, all these things we all experience. And leadership has to understand that we're all experiencing that. We're not alone in that way. So talking about things that are difficult and not shaming. Sometimes students get very angry, but it's not because they're uncomfortable about me saying, can you try that again? And they get very angry because they've had parents who've said everything is great. I remember my son coming home from school and he had a medal around his neck. And I said, oh, you got a medal. And he said, it's not fair, because children have an incredible sense of fairness. And I said, what do you mean? He said, we lost. I've got a medal around me, but we lost. And they won and we lost. It's not a fair medal. And I think, we can overlove, we can only overprotect them, but they have to, it seems to be that when we fail and get back on the horse, so to speak, our brain grows. We have to face failure, but we have to face failure and then be supported. One of my rules to my teachers is that you don't give a note to someone unless you can change it. Because there's very scary, HR says to you, oh, you're this, but they don't help you. That's where I come in the embodied thing. You're doing this, so maybe, but this is the exercise you can do, or this is what I would suggest you do to get out of it. So you have to risk in a family that your child is going to at sometimes dislike you intensely because you're stopping them doing something. I tell a story about my son. I don't know if he likes me telling, but he was about 4 and we were in the bathroom and getting his teeth cleaned, and he got hold of the toothpaste and he started to squirt it around. And of course, it's fantastic. Any of us would like to squirt. It's a fun thing to do, to squirt the old toothpaste around. And I stopped him and he didn't like that. And he tried again. I said, stopped him. No, you're not going to squirt toothpaste around. And he went very quiet. And he looked up at me and he said, I've got a secret about you. And I said, oh, what's that? And he said, and he made a shape of my head, or a head with his hands. He said, I want to do this. And he then punched my head, the imaginary head. And I just roared with laughter. And I said, of course you do, because it's fun. And then he started to laugh. And then I said, my students feel that about me sometimes. They want to punch my head because I say, it's not good enough. I can't hear you. An audience member has just walked through the rain and queued, and they can't hear what you say. That's not good enough. But I was being so emotionally clear. And I said, well, it doesn't matter if I can't hear you. So, it's a balance. Everything in life is a balance. But it's a state of, I say to people, it's an honor to work with everyone. But when somebody gives you a note, they care enough to help you. But you have to then say, try doing this.
And when it comes to children who have experienced any type of trauma, I'm curious to know, how do you think parents and teachers can help children regain their voice and presence in that type of a situation?
This is right out of my knowledge, really, except my knowledge tells me that trauma ends up in the body, and particularly the breath. The nicest thing you can do is to help them release their body and breathe. Maybe if you just lie on the floor with them and you've got a little cushion holding your head and you put your feet on the floor and you just breathe. That's the only deep knowledge. I don't teach anything I don't know deeply. I have very strong suspicions about things, But until I know what I know, that's why I think of myself as somebody very slow of study. I study very deeply. And that breath, and I know that students that have had terrible lives, and they I always say to anybody I work with, you don't have to do anything you don't want to. If it's uncomfortable, you can stop, because if we breathe, something might come up. Because I think what happens to us is that when we get traumatized, if we stop breathing, we stop feeling the trauma. So very simple stuff. And I've done this with top therapists as the embodiment person, but it's not my expertise, although I touch it in the classroom often. It's often in the room. I have students coming from all sorts of backgrounds, some of them terrifying, but equally people who have come from what seems to be moneyed background, but have never had the attention of their parents. We all need full attention. We all need somebody's second circle attention on us with unconditional love. With unconditional love. And I think those things I'm optimistic, because I've had students that have come, they're refugees, and they're the ones that actually work very hard in a way that people who feel that everything's fine with them don't. And if the work works, and generally it works, you don't go into a top investment bank with all these people not wanting to work with you. And, I tell the story in the book, this guy coming in saying, oh, I hate all this shit, all sizzle and no steak, all cosmetic shit. And within, you just do something and it works and they feel the difference. And then at the end he said, oh, there's a lot of steak. You gave me some steak. So this is ancient wisdom. This goes back thousands of years. The exercises I do go back. They're of us. They're of our body, our breath systems, and our presence. So if you can give somebody full attention and breathe with them and stay with them. Some of my students think I'm very, we get things wrong. We don't get everything right. That's sort of arrogance. But, if somebody has a breakthrough, they're normally on a text. I don't do it. I do it on Shakespeare or great text. And they suddenly have a breakthrough and everyone wants to stroke them. And I'll say, just let them be for a bit. Just let them assess what's happened. Don't make it better. Maybe sometimes we just have to go, oh God, I've just got to stay here for a bit. So it's not my expertise. My expertise is understanding. And I think now I'm very good at diagnosing exactly where the tension is. And it's often very small. The trauma tension is very small in the body, because my analogy, it's like a lake, a still lake, and the tension goes in like a small pebble and the ripples go out. And you see where the ripples go into the shoulders and the jaw. But sometimes it comes back right into the breath somewhere. And I didn't know any of this when I left college. I didn't know any of it. I just stumbled across it. You would get somebody to breathe because they're going into the theatre and they're suddenly talking about rape. And I'm thinking, oh my God, nobody told me this when I trained. And so, of course, you go and find out about it. And they say, oh, yes, they're breathing. They're just remembering now something. And generally, just the relief of taking a breath is a great healing thing. Not always. You need support staff that can have much more knowledge than you do about certain things. Go carefully, go gently.
And on those final remarks you just made, linked to the importance of remembering to take a breath and being gentle with ourselves, I'd like to take a moment to thank you very much for sharing your life experiences and work-related knowledge with me and with our listeners. I'm very honored that you took such a long time to talk with us today. Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. Well, of course, it matters to me. But thank you very much. I've enjoyed it too.
That concludes the second part of our conversation with Professor Rodenburg which was recorded on the 24th of November 2023. If you enjoyed this conversation, please make sure to listen to episode number 3, which is an interview with one of Professor Rodenburg's students, the talented Dr. Laura Penn. In that episode, you will learn about how Dr. Penn builds upon Professor Rodenburg's work and knowledge to create a different career track. As well, you will learn tips and tools on how you can become more persuasive by improving your public speaking, which Dr. Penn refers to as leadership speaking. And as we wrap up, I want to thank Ignatius Calabria for creating and providing the wonderful music you've heard throughout this episode. And thank you to you, dear listener, for being here and learning with me about how persuasion impacts our daily lives. Please stay tuned for more episodes of the Persuasive Mindset. Until next time, be well.